Hello, welcome to day 3 of the 8th annual U.S. Media Literacy Week. My name is Michelle Chula-Lipkin. I am the Executive Director of the National Association for Media Literacy Education, the leading national nonprofit membership organization dedicated to advancing media literacy education in the United States. The mission of Media Literacy Week is to highlight the power of media literacy education and its essential role in education all across the country. U.S. Media Literacy Week calls attention to media literacy education by bringing together hundreds of partners for events and activities around the country. I am very excited to be here with you all today for tackling mental health with digital literacy. I really can't think of a more important topic for discussion. I want to thank our partners at Roblox for their support of Media Literacy Week, but more importantly, their commitment to media literacy education. I am honored to introduce Laura Higgins, who is the Senior Director of Community Safety and Civility at Roblox, with more than 2 decades of experience building proven safeguarding, online safety, and civility programs. Thank you so much, Laura, for your partnership and for being here today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It is an absolute honor to be here. Media Literacy Week, I think, is such a valuable time for us all to discuss it as professionals working in the field, and also to share some of the goodness that's happening out there. And hopefully our conversation today will be really helpful for lots of different audiences as we go into it. So just for a little bit of background, as Michelle said, I am Senior Director of Community Safety and Civility at Roblox. For anyone who hasn't heard of Roblox, which is surprising but does happen, our vision at Roblox is to reimagine the way that people come together. So we offer a safe and civil place where people can create and explore and collaborate and share experiences. We have millions of different experiences on Roblox, all of which are created by our global developer community. And they really range in the types of experience. So it could be a role play, it could be a very traditional video game type formats. You know, people can go shopping and explore brands, go to fashion shows, go to pop concerts, go and visit a museum. There are so many different things they can do on the platform. But one of the things that for us is really vital is supporting that developer community and also the people who are going in and using these experiences to really learn some of those essential skills that they need to create safe, positive, healthy spaces for themselves and for those around them. So working with NAMLI, we're really proud that, you know, we're partnering with them, and we're really looking forward to the work we can do together to help to empower the whole community. So whether it's kids, tweens, teens, parents, educators, law enforcement, policymakers, we all have a space where we need to be learning more, upskilling, sharing ideas around how to build resilience, how to stay safe when you're online. And so this conversation is obviously a really welcome part of that. The theme today, as Michelle said, is about tackling mental health with digital literacy. As our description said, at the end of 2021, the US Surgeon General declared a youth mental health crisis across the US. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm based actually in the UK. And we have exactly the same thing happening here. And I have no doubt it's global. The things that have happened in the last few years have really impacted adolescent mental health in a way that none of us could have predicted. So whilst, you know, there's no particular reason, we know that whilst the online world provides such amazing positive experiences and opportunities for young people, it can also sometimes have the adverse reaction. So really looking at how we can use this kind of building resilience, helping young people to be savvy and safe when they're on these platforms, we believe can really impact in a positive way their mental health and also to support them if they're in crisis. So I'm not going to keep talking. I have some amazing people on the panel. I'm very proud to say both of them are great friends of ours. So I will introduce Sameer Hinduja, who's professor and researcher, and one of the leads at the Cyberbullying Research Centre, and David Bickham, who is a researcher and based at Boston Children's Hospital and at the Digital Wellness Lab. I would like to hand over to them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit more about the work that they're doing. Sameer, may I hand over to you first?
Greetings, Laura. It's good to see you again. And with Justin Patchen, I co-direct the Cyberbullying Research Center, and we focus on a lot of forms of online harm, especially amongst youth, cyberbullying, sexting, digital dating abuse, digital self-harm, etc. But we always lean in the direction of figuring out what we can do in order to induce positive behaviors and positive interactions and building healthy communities online. So it's one of our joys to work with platforms, but also nonprofits, any youth serving entities in order to assist them towards that end so that we can develop these mature, wise, responsible citizens online and offline.
Wonderful. Thank you, Samir. David, can I throw it over to you?
Hi, thank you, Laura. It's very nice to be here. My name's David Bickham. I'm research faculty at Boston Children's Hospital and the lead researcher at the Digital Wellness Lab. The Digital Wellness Lab, we do research to sort of examine the intersection of children's media use and their health and well-being. And this incorporates all of childhood, all the way up to young adults. I've done research looking at very young children's exposure to advertising, all the way up to young adults' use of dating apps, and that linked to their mental health and sexual behaviors. In terms of media literacy, I've worked with a number in school work, really demonstrating what works and how to maximize the impact by going into the schools where these programs are being launched, working with the creators of the program, working with the schools to demonstrate what works and what doesn't, and to really inform the creators about how best to make their media literacy projects and interventions effective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. Your sound did cut out just a very tiny bit. David did warn us before we started the panel that his internet's a little bit iffy today. We should be okay, but we might let you know if we need you to turn the camera off.
Yeah,
hopefully we won't need
sorry
to.
about that.
No, that's fine. It happens to all of us. It wouldn't be a conference about tech if that didn't happen, David. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we go into the bigger conversation. So obviously, it sounds like, we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I would love both of you to talk a little bit about some of the research you've been working on, and then we'll dig into some of the hopefully positive and solution focused things that we can do around what could be quite a negative topic. I want to leave a bit of time at the end for a Q&A for our audience. So if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. We use the Q&A function. We'll make sure we have time for that. And then right at the end, we do have a very exciting announcement to make. So we'll make sure that we leave time for that as well. But for now, let's dig a little bit into the conversation. So David, you obviously you've kind of given us a little outline of some of the work that you're doing. So I'm aware that you've recently had a publication. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so I've been working on media literacy programs for quite a while. The most recent one really demonstrates how some of the curriculum producers are shifting from more traditional deconstruction of advertising approaches, which is pretty standard kind of approach to media literacy, to more what's aligned with kind of like digital citizenship, which is very much about understanding online communications and how to go into those communications with an attitude and a goal to maximize mental health, and rather than talking more about substance use or food advertising, which is which historically has been a couple of the areas that these kind of programs have focused on. But in terms, so the evaluation I did is really one of the few we know of that the impact of that type, especially ones that are done in school. These are harder to get into schools than even the other kind, and I can talk more about that later. But and what we found, I'll say, it was the first time we ran this program at multiple schools. It was in a school district in New Hampshire. We found effectiveness in terms of knowledge increase and in terms of some attitude change. So we've got sort of laying the groundwork for larger adoption of this program that really helps kids think about their digital footprint, think about online communities and ways to build kindness and positive interactions in those spaces.
That's amazing. And I'm sure we're going to dig into some of those themes a little bit more. Samia, you've been very busy recently. It's been anti-bullying month. So you've been, I know, putting out really great advice around some of the cyberbullying work that you do. But also we spoke yesterday about your media literacy recent publication. Can you share a little bit about that one, please?
Sure. Just as a reference point, let's just sort of define media literacy, because I'm not sure if everyone here knows what it is. And of course, the definitions vary, but if we just want to have this basic understanding, basic shared understanding, I'm thinking about how, we need individuals, whether they're youth or whether they're adults, to be able to, of course, access content and messages and information online, but also able to know how best to create it, best to analyze it, and best to evaluate it, regardless of the medium, regardless of the platform that it's on, and regardless of the form that it takes, whether it's pictures or videos or text. And so with that in mind, we've been thinking a lot about how media literacy, many individuals immediately think about how we want youth to be able to discern between fact and fiction. For example, spot disinformation and misinformation. And of course, without a doubt, that is of tremendous import. But I mentioned at the onset that we like to focus on online harms. And so we've been thinking about how media literacy can actually help youth and, of course, adults when it comes to their ability to deal with or address various forms of online harms. And in my post, which I'll post in the chat window in a little bit, I was just sort of breaking it down into these categories. So first off, when you think about, let's say, youth in this case, they're amazing creators, right? They blow your mind when it comes to the quality of the videos that they create on TikTok or the Sims that they build in Roblox. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing when it comes to what they're able to do. And so we want to tap into that skill set, tap into those talents and natural interests and abilities so that they're able to make content that is, number one, positive, number two, inclusive, and be thinking about, okay, what is inclusive and what might be leaving some other people out. And then also we want them to be thinking about how they can intentionally enhance their digital reputation. So yes, they know they're not supposed to do the wrong things, but media literacy can actually help them to present themselves in a positive, favorable light, which will also attract more opportunities and more, I would say, blessings or cool things that happen in their lives. So briefly, let me just cover the other 2 points and then I will turn it back over to you. We talked about creation, but now it's also, okay, analyzing content. I really want them to grow in their ability to sort of discern the nuances of social interactions and relationship dynamics that are occurring and unfolding, whether they're in group chats, whether they're in a comment thread for an Instagram post, regardless of whether they're in a Discord channel, regardless of the venue. I want them to be able to always be noticing, okay, is everyone having a great time when it comes to banter, or are certain sentiments being expressed that cross a line and unfortunately inflict a little bit of harm? And so what can be done about that? Yes, you might want to just sit on your hands and mind your own business, but if something is wrong, if there's injustice taking place, or if there's harm taking place, victimization, we hope that they're compelled to action, whether it's in the form of defending, upstanding, counter speech, and we can talk about that later. And the last point, and thank you for your patience as I cover these, just has to do with the ability to properly evaluate what they see online in terms of, okay, is this person trying to scam me? Is this person trying to learn information about me that they'll then use against me? And so that relates to a couple recent trends that are on the uptick. For example, we've heard about deepfakes, which is where software is being used in order to alter pictures or videos to make it look like someone featured is doing something inappropriate or illegal when they're actually not. And so I would say media literacy also involves helping youth be able to spot, inconsistencies or jitter or, buffering or some of these other telltale signals of a fake video. And the last point I'll make is that we're seeing an uptick in sextortion and catfishing. And so there again, we want youth to be able to really determine who they're speaking with and prove the veracity of that person's identity so that they're not subject to others trying to impersonate somebody else and then them, of course, being defrauded or falling prey to someone trying to trick them and then using their content, images, posts, videos against them to blackmail them or otherwise.
So that was amazing. And please never, ever apologize, Samia. the work that you do is so vital. And as we said, we want people to really think about these things. All of those were so important and relevant. It's really helpful to hear about, particularly the things that we're seeing on the increase, the things that are on the rise, and particularly around deepfakes. In my previous world, before I joined Roblox 4 years ago, I worked at the UK Safer Internet Centre, where I ran all of our helpline operations. And one of my helplines was dedicated to victims of image-based abuse online. And so we were seeing it when it was kind of just coming in, and even by the time I left 4 years ago, the deepfakes thing, but it was specifically targeting adults, and we're aware that actually kids are now being targeted, kids and teens are being targeted as well. And we've seen funny kind of parody videos where they're using that technology, but I think people, it seems a stretch that it would happen to them, but actually it is something that we're seeing. And so, as you say, that being able to interpret and sort of unpick what's real and what's fake it sounds so simple, but it is actually really quite difficult, and technology's getting more and more. I'm going to talk in a minute about a piece of work that we did with one of our UK safety partners, Internet Matters. But when you mentioned catfishing, that was something that came up specifically in this study that we did with teenagers and adolescents, where they were sort of talking about authenticity online. And for them, it felt really important that they were being perceived as authentic and the real selves, because they were seeing much more of this kind of catfishing behavior. So they were like, I'm wary about who everyone is when they're online, so therefore I feel like I really need to bring my true self, otherwise people might assume that I'm not. And so that was just a really interesting reflection. We're going to come back to some of those points in a minute, Samir. David, I'd love to throw over to you. Again, Roblox works very closely with the Digital Wellness Lab, and I know that my manager Tammy, hi Tammy, sits on the research group with you, and you do this amazing pulse survey. Could you tell us a little bit about that and some of the recent findings that you've had, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do is we reach out regularly to an online survey panels to survey parents and adolescents about their attitudes about their media use, their parenting strategies, the perceptions and the impact of these things on their well-being and mental health, and do this check-in so that we can always kind of test out newest topics, so we can kind of get the most up-to-date opinions and thoughts on what's new and ongoing. So we did a couple of surveys during the sort of group part of the pandemic, right, when everybody was home. One right then, and then one right during the first summer when some of the regulations were lifted, and then one with adolescents later to get adolescent viewpoints. And what we really found we found some findings that run across the three surveys. And one is that both parents and youth see social media especially as beneficial to their peer and social relationships. So they see it as something that is a positive place for them to interact with around their friends. They see it as a way to connect with each other, and even as a way that's and those are, really their opinions on these, right? It's not looking at what the impact is. But I think it helps us kind of conceptualize what they're bringing into the environment. Like, what is it that they're taking to these interactions? And it's something that's pretty positive. That shifts when we talk about things like body image. They're concerned about the impact of social media on body image. And it shifts when we talk about academics. So they're pretty concerned about overall media use and screen time with kids' academic performance and school performance. One thing that we find throughout, which surprised me and we keep asking about it, is a link between their use and physical symptoms. So they report things like headaches, backaches, neck pain, eye strain at a much higher frequency than we would expect in young kids, right? Like, these are adolescents or school age kids, and both parents and the children reported these as much more frequent than we had expected and linked specifically to their use of screen media. So those things that to some extent surprised us. So it's kind of overall capturing the two sides of all of modern media use, right? That it can be a positive way to connect with each other, but that doesn't come without any risks. And those risks are, we need, the goal of this work is for us to identify where can we amplify the positive effects and encourage positive interactions, and where can we intervene on things where there's harm or risk involved.
Brilliant. That was a great overview. Thank you, David. And I think, a lot of us who sit at our computers way before the pandemic, who were working online a lot of the time, we will recognize those symptoms in ourselves, bad posture and those sorts of things. And, most of our companies are really generous in that they'll support us getting new glasses because we need them for our screen use. But I think, as you say, that's a really interesting shift perhaps that's happened
and
with young people.
We also found that kids that had been diagnosed with some sort of behavioral or developmental delay or disorder were more likely to experience those. And that's something we haven't quite teased apart yet, but I think that in talking to people who study ADHD and treat kids with ADHD, the idea that they're using tablets in very unusual positions and for long periods of time didn't surprise them at all. And I'm like, oh, that's probably what's driving this, right?
That's really interesting. I'm just going to very briefly talk a little bit more about the Internet Matters work that we did at Roblox. So rather than a big, large-scale research project, we did very small focus groups. We worked with them last year through the summer, and we really dug into. It was kind of, what do you want your parents and caregivers to know about your online world? So demystifying what their teenagers' interactions online were like. Tell us, almost a day in the life of what sorts of platforms are you using? Are you using them to create, or how does it affect your, what's your community like? How do you make friends with people? Really interesting. I will drop that in the chat in a moment as well. But just some of the key points, they really just sit so well with the conversation we're having today. So one of the things was that, they talked a lot about having agency and how they felt much more empowered, and really they felt resilient when they had this kind of basic knowledge, understanding. They felt strong, they could support others, and they were owning their online experience. It wasn't happening at them. Another thing that they reflected was that parents were still, for many of them, the first port of call if something happened, but they actually were starting to feel like the parents didn't quite have the right knowledge. They might be able to help in a very practical way about, okay, so, you've seen something that was upsetting or whatever, but actually the general misunderstanding was around what a teenager's online life is like. So there was always this little bit of shock, or, oh, well, perhaps you shouldn't visit those sites, that trying to make it very simple, or of course the old classic around removing the tech as a way of protecting, which, as we know, well, I think we'll come on to that a little bit later. So, okay, thank you so much. I think that gives us a little bit of the background around what the landscape looks like a little bit, and thinking about media literacy specifically. Do you guys have any specific examples that you've seen that are being run by other charities or tech platforms, things that you think have been really helpful for young people who might be experiencing some of these mental health issues?
I think companies continue to innovate. I know it's easy to demonize them, and they've been, of course, called to the mat over the last handful of months because perhaps they've fallen short when it comes to our expectations related to trust, safety, transparency, security. Not perhaps, but perhaps arguably, yes, they have. And so with that said, though, I feel like they do feel an onus of responsibility to do something. They want to make sure that they're building communities where individuals are relatively healthy and are able to thrive, instead of it being this negative, powerful effect in their lives. And so what does this look like in practice? Well, more and more are attempting to use messaging strategies, for example, interstitials while you're scrolling through your feed that might remind you to take a pause, that might ask you to be very wary about information that has been reported in the past as questionable or suspect. And I think that's useful because we need those those moments being pushed to us, giving us pause, forcing us to think and reframe and reevaluate what's in front of us. And my hope is that over time, that will allow us to become more questioning, more discerning, and more judicious when it comes to what we just easily swallow, maybe historically, whereas now we're taking some time to really think about what's the impact here, what is the agenda, what is the motive, and who's behind it.
I always come back to, the April Fool's joke a few years ago about the drunk texting app. Do you really want to send that? Now, if that did exist in the real world, I think it would be really helpful for everybody. But it does work the same way in terms of, do you really believe that? If we all just stop for a moment, and it's easy for us perhaps as adults to sort of talk about teens, but actually I think what all of us are seeing right now is adults who are not using those critical thinking skills that we so much want to provide for our teens, because they believe pretty much anything that they read online. David, do you have any examples?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question itself is critical, because for so long we've been pushing the responsibility for this to parents and users, and even the media literacy programs I work with, which are in schools, and I think that's how you have the impact. Like, you go to where the kids are and you go to where they're used to learning. But even that has the reach compared to the reach of TikTok is just minuscule, right? So there's asking about, switching some of this responsibility to the platforms, is the way of the future. And it is something that, I agree. I think that I see people at all of these different companies just excited about the possibilities for them to have a positive impact. And it always just, is just very enlightening to me, and thrills me to hear that these are the kind of conversations that they're having. So there's a public health approach that identifies sort of it's in the shape of a pyramid, right? The things at the top of the pyramid are things that have the least amount of impact, and the things at the bottom of the impact are the things that have the most amount of impact. And education and individual effort is at the top of that pyramid. It has the most work and the least impact. But the bottom are population level interventions, where we design the environment to encourage healthy, positive relationships. And that framework is what has to happen going forward in the digital space. That needs to be baked into the design of these platforms as early as possible. And some of the work we're doing now, we have a project that we're designing and developing that's all around this idea of design for kindness, design for positive interaction, design for mental health, and we're doing a project where we sit with kids when they play Minecraft, or they are on Roblox, and we talk to them about why they're doing these things, what it's like to interact in that space. And there's just so many possibilities to move away from an algorithm that's designed to suck you into content that is most mass appeal, to something that steers is positive content and pro-social interactions.
As a quick follow-up, I'm also seeing some companies innovate in other ways. For example, I remember Thorn, which focuses on child sexual exploitation, them creating a video specific to sextortion. And I thought it was an incredible teaching tool. It was very relevant. It was relatable. We're always concerned when it comes to adults making content for youth. Is it going to be lame? Is it going to connect with them? Or is it going to fail miserably? But they've done a good job. Google created the Be Internet Awesome program, where they built this virtual world of sorts called Interland, where you tackle 5 different subject areas. One's called Share with Care, Don't Fall for Fake, which again relates to misinformation, Secure Your Secrets, which relates to, of course, internet safety and internet security 101. It's cool to be kind, and when in doubt, talk it out. For example, promoting communication with trusted adults. So I think that there's so much potential as it relates to metaverse properties and immersive environments, allowing us to also cultivate skills amongst a user base in a very powerful, relevant, cutting edge way. And so that's my hope. And the last thing that I wanted to say that David reminded me of is we need youth to, without a doubt, carry the torch. And I'm seeing, like you're seeing, many youth doing really fun, interesting things to help inform others. For example, on TikTok and then consequently on Instagram and Twitter, where it's reposted. You and I have seen stories of or videos where youth specifically take the time to track the digital footprint of individuals who are acting in malicious ways or who are being racist or threatening, just for the purposes of demonstrating to the rest of the user base that, look, you can't just hide behind a screen name. You can't believe that you're fully anonymous. There's always a way to trace this digital breadcrumb trail to figure out who you are. And my hope is that, number one, that deters individuals from doing the wrong thing. And number two, that helps the rest of the user base, youth and adults, level up in their own skill sets to use the tools that are available online in order to do this investigatory work, in order to help the platform or the school or the family or the community to be able to get to the bottom of the problem and ideally solve it.
That's an amazing point, Samir. And actually, my head was just thinking, Netflix have literally made a fortune out of these documentaries. And we have this whole generation of young people who are just going off and doing it by themselves because they do have the skills, they have the passion. They want this drive to make the online environment safer, more civil, kinder. They don't want to hang out in the, unfortunately, what a lot of us adults might see on certain platforms. The youngsters don't want that. They really are trying to call it out and say, no, this is not where we want things to be. And that's great, but that's not everybody. Of course, some people are more vulnerable and they're more in a kind of consumer place. So therefore, that is exactly to David's point, where it is the responsibility of platforms and educators and policy and lawmakers and everyone to then kind of put that safeguarding around as well. For me, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I thought you were going to move on to one.
I was going to say,
I wanted to bounce back to something Samir said real quick. Sorry. I think this idea of platform providing this content in that kind of educational kind of format, sort of that you're talking about, like these places that you can go to have the messaging, and I think that there's really great potential there, and I've seen both sides of the potential, right? I've seen some people design something where it's like a very old school video game. And then when you clear a screen, here's a little message about digital citizenship. Yeah, and you move on. Versus, another place that has an avatar-based game where the whole purpose behind the content is solved by using pro-social online or by doing safe internet practices. And so I think, we have to encourage places when they want to design this to expand their design team to people who know how to create educational content. And like that means to implement what we know about learning theories, and educational content theories. Like the one that I always go back to is the capacity model, which says you have to have your message and your content linked and overlapped. And if they're separate and you're distracted by flashy things and the education's on this side, you won't learn it. And so I really want to always encourage producers to be like, your in-house design team is fantastic, but this may be a gap that you have. You need to go find how to design really positive effective educational messages.
I agree wholeheartedly. And working for a company like Roblox, which is all user-generated content, but also we do have, quite big brands, organizations coming into the platform and working with the developer community to build these experiences. And one of the things that we've seen recently, some of these amazing experiences, is one to be launched very soon. It's focused on self-esteem and body image, for example. This is now an evidence-based piece of work. They're working with a university to kind of analyze impact on people who are using the experience. But actually, I've played it. This is not a very kind of worthy educational piece. It is a Roblox experience. It's a game. It's got obstacle courses. It's got all the things that somebody would expect coming into the platform. But there's very thoughtful messaging. and the journey that a user goes on as they go through this experience. So yeah, I think, as you say, there's no wrong way in theory. We're going to come on to that in a minute though, but there are a lot better ways we could do it to really engage, make it meaningful, make it sticky. We want people to come and really learn and enjoy and build those skills rather than being told. Now that leads me beautifully onto audience backstage. We have our own chat function that's running, and I've been talking very briefly with Michelle and the team, and rightfully Michelle said, you know, this is great. It's lovely to hear all the things that we're doing to try to better understand teens and adolescents, but they should be on the panel with us. And that is a huge oversight on our behalf. So next time, I promise we will have the voice of young people here rather than us speaking for them. They can tell you all of their own thoughts and feelings about this stuff. So yeah, I just really wanted to point that out. I'm normally such an advocate for having young people, and actually I'm sitting here going, why do I not have young people here? So that's just something to think about. I think when we're doing these things, they should be front and center. So moving swiftly on. Oh, actually, I just wanted to wrap up with the technology thing. Just a couple of points that we're seeing more and more, but I think we want to see more of. Hopefully, you know, many of you might be aware there's a lot of regulatory stuff happening across the world in terms of the tech world. So I'm really hopeful that companies are just going to keep innovating and keep really looking at ways that they can get better at this stuff. But in particular, things like having helplines and support services in the platform. So it's that real in the moment support that you can give to young people, using your AI, machine learning, algorithms in a really positive way, so that if you see that a young person is showing signs of distress, that it kind of automatically will reach out and point them in the right direction of support services. Those sorts of things we're seeing increasingly, which is great. Positive and negative behavior nudges. So we kind of touched on that earlier. About, you know, having interstitials and things like that. But even if somebody's almost breaking the rules, I think there's an educational moment we can get in there by going, did you realize that's hurtful? Maybe you might want to try saying it this way. And then even if somebody does violate the terms, obviously it depends how egregious their behavior is, but if it's quite a low level thing, is being really clear on why you're taking action on their behavior. Again, it could be a teachable moment, or it might build, you know, if there's an opportunity for them to appeal, it might lead to a discussion about something else that happened on the platform. So those are the sorts of things I'd really love to see much more of. And that really sits on us as the tech companies to be, as I say, innovating in that space. So what doesn't work, as well as not having young people on our panel? So one of the things at Roblox that, you know, has frustrated us very much over the years. And actually, again, we did some research, oh my gosh, back in early 2019, I think it was, where, you know, we asked parents and teens, you know, what do you think of online spaces? And parents were saying, you know, I'm equally terrified and excited about online spaces and the opportunities they bring for my kids, and particularly around gaming. You know, they were saying, well, I can see that they're learning these skills, they're learning to code, they might want to be able to go off and get a great job. But equally, I'm hearing all these horrible things. And when we dug into it, they were hearing it all from the media. It wasn't lived experience. It was, I heard about this thing and now I'm really scared of it. Have you actually seen it? Well, no. So, you know, that kind of really scaremongering stuff doesn't work for parents. It just really terrifies them. And we know that it doesn't work with young people. They get that once a year school assembly where they all sit down and they get shown a scary video about grooming. And they're like, well, it's never going to happen to me. And off they go. We know that stuff doesn't work. Where else do you think we have room for improvement with these things? Samir, let me throw it to you.
Sure, and you and I sort of talked about this on our Google Doc when we were preparing, but I feel so strongly about this. We must all remember that youth do absolutely have some level of competence as it relates to media literacy. But frankly, there are so many adults who just don't give them any credit and think that they're clueless and just these sheep who go online and they're completely open to being victimized and they don't practice any internet safety one-on-one principles or practices. They're just there, you know, and they're ripe for the picking. But that's not true at all. And that's so condescending when we engage with them with that tone or with that tenor. And so what I think we need to do, for example, in my life, I would love you to remind me of my competence before you encourage me to, you know, do a little bit better in this area or that area. because it shows me that you've actually recognized that, I've been putting in the efforts, that I do certain things well, rather than you just immediately come and blast me about all these things that you think I'm doing wrong. And so I want us to give them so much more credit. And yes, maybe you're on this call because your child has recently made a huge mistake, and so your perspective is a little bit biased, but by and large, our youth do have some level of competence when it comes to media literacy, and it's up to us to support them and bolster them and encourage them and help them to level up in that area, rather than, again, be condescending or judgmental or critical with our tone or our words.
David, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, first off, one of the things we do at the Digital Wellness Lab is that Michael Rich, who's a pediatrician and our director, has a clinic where he sees adolescents who have what we call problematic interactive media use, which is really have experienced the most traumatic effects of disordered use. And so I run the research for that clinic, and we look at the patients and dive into who they are. And what we've really learned from that is, so that, for some kids, there's really a reason for fear, right? Like there's this concern. But what we learned from that is most of these young people have some kind of underlying mental health issue that then when they're in this environment, it's very difficult for them to cope effectively. They have limited. So I would say, one, identify the kids that are at that highest risk rather than having this full-blown kind of fear messaging, but to say there are actually people who need that may be at high risk, and helping them along and identifying them can lead to prevention really nicely. The other thing I would say is, going back to kind of thinking about the people who study how to design messaging, and like there are health communication messages that we know work. And one of the best one ever was the Truth Campaign for adolescents, which really intervened on smoking, and incredibly effective. And what they did was they let the youth behind the scenes, and they said, look, you're being manipulated in this way by these companies or by this place. And I think triggering that, in this media literacy that does this in programs, find that kids are incredibly responsive to it. And there's been a lot of, how do we let them behind the scenes? How do we give them the power, flip the power a little bit? And I think that there could be some very creative strategies for doing that in this realm.
No, absolutely. I think you're right. And actually, that's a really lovely positive. I'm mindful of time. We have just over 15 minutes left. I want to give Michelle 2 minutes at the end, and we want to make sure we've got at least 5 minutes for Q&A. Please do submit your questions if you have any, but we really want to try to end this on a positive with some great takeaways for people. So there are 2 things I'd love you guys to think about and talk about if we could. So one is, how do we best reach these audiences with these helpful media literacy tips, advice? So whether it's young people, parents particularly, and caregivers, I think, they're crying out for this support, but also other audiences. And then how do we really make it meaningful, particularly when we're thinking about teens and adolescents? To your point, Samir, about the Thorn sextortion video, I love that video. I used to use it a lot in my previous work. That's how we do it authentically. But any ideas, things that you'd like to share on those topics? Samir, I'll throw to you first.
Sure. When you're thinking about any issue that youth face, we have to have them front and center. We have to continue to empower them and ask them to create, deliverables as part of initiatives or programming or strategies or contests or competitions or campaigns. And oftentimes they're stoked to do so, as long as we've, shown them that we care about what you have to say, we validate their voice, and maybe we incentivize it somehow with prizes from local businesses. I just feel like they do such a great job at creating compelling messaging and projects and signage and digital creations that can help reinforce the importance of media literacy to the masses, but also themselves while they're in the middle of doing those projects, they grow in their skill sets. And so that's where I would start off with when it comes to schools and communities and even families, households.
Thank you. That's great. David?
Yeah, I mean, what this triggered in my thought was this finding that I keep going back to that says a positive parenting approach, authoritative parenting, which is, we have warmth but we have understandable rules that are reasonable and that we enforce. That approach instills values and positive behaviors in kids that link to the parents. And the findings show that translates to the digital world, that leads to less exposure to cyberbullying, less risky behaviors, regardless of media-based rules and regulations by parents. And I think that there's something to that, right? That we have to remember that if we can think about these general kind of citizenship building attitudes or character development attitudes, that's going to translate into these worlds. And that, to me, I think that kind of messaging may be less scary for parents, because it's not, you have to understand TikTok, like you have to, you have to do what you feel that you recognize as positive parenting, and help them through this as you would anything else. And I don't know, I feel like there's something there that could bypass some of the fear of this the engagement that around this that parents can feel.
Thank you, that's great. Helena's just put in the chat a brilliant point about, aside from building skills, knowledge and attitudes, we need to look at aptitude being a component of a competence to do a certain kind of work at a certain level. David, you gave Michael Rich a name check earlier. He's actually on our safety advisory board at Roblox, so we work really, really closely together, and he always talks about digital mastery in this space, and that's exactly that point that you're talking about. There's one thing to kind of go, here's the education, here's the stuff, but then there's that next level that is I'm so confident I'm doing this, and without even having to think about it, it just comes naturally. It's one of my instincts that I can smell out misinformation, or at least I know when I need to go and check a fact on something. Again, Tammy, nice shout out for you, but she always talks about the spidey senses and just kind of go, something doesn't quite feel right. And that is so, so important. So that's a great point, Helena. We want to get this youth to a point that when they're adults, this is literally just one of their senses. So I think that's wonderful. I'm just going to say, sort of from a tech point of view, I think we obviously have a huge part to play in this. We're all getting better, some of it by force, because, regulation coming in. I'm very proud I work at Roblox. I think for us, it's been one of our sort of key tenets right from the beginning, is about this sort of civility and digital education work that we do. Thank you, Samir. That's why we're all friends. But it's still difficult to do. It's still difficult for us to reach those audiences. Kids come onto Roblox because they want to go in and experience, or they want to build something in Roblox Studio. They don't want to go and visit our safety center. So we have to still be creative about how do we get the messaging out. So I love that idea, the fact we are seeing these partnerships coming onto the platform and creating these very subtle experiences about mindfulness. We worked with Alo Yoga on something called The Sanctuary, which just offered a couple of minutes of a guided meditation every day. And then we kind of did some feedback with young people, and it was just amazing. It was one that really resonated with me, was this young woman whose parents were getting divorced, and she said, my house is just screaming and shouting all the time, and I just went in this experience and it just gave me a few minutes of peace every day. That's amazing. But also there was a lot of learning that was happening at the same time, but it was very subtle, and it just felt appropriate. It's that idea of that in the moment when it's most needed, I think. And again, about, giving young people, again, that agency, that I'm in control of this bit. It's not being fed at me. They know when they're being patronized. They know when it's a bit too educational. So again, this is why I think for us, this is a shout out to you both that are on the panel, but also to NAMLI as our partners and other people we work with, that, for us, I think the most authentic and the biggest impact we can have is by working with lots of external partners. We as a tech platform can do so much, but we can't do everything. So we need to work with you, both as the experts, to help guide us on what we should be doing, but then also when we do good things, to help to amplify that and make sure, for example, that parents, as you say, they don't have to be experts of Roblox. They don't have to be able to come and play experiences, but it's helpful if they know where the parent controls are and that they feel that they're a bit more in control, or that they can support their young person if they have a bad experience. So yeah, just thank you. And I'd love to see much more collaboration across both tech and the broader kind of NGOs and academia, because I think together we work really well. I have a question from Michelle. Lots of great organizations doing work in the space. What do you think we could do better to better collaborate as a community? Great question. How can we work together since we're all working for the same cause? I'll throw it to you first, David.
Yeah, that's just a simple, easy question to answer. No problem. No, I think this idea of coming together around not just safety, because I think that's always been in overlap among, it's always been like, okay, this is something we can all talk about, where we are doing approaches, we have to keep our own information to ourselves, but we can come around and talk about safety. And I think what digital wellness, or to expanding it to well-being, where it's not just safety, but it's about, can we come around and talk about together things like how do we enhance mental health? How do we make sure interactions are safe and fun and positive? So I think expanding that window would help build some community.
Me too. I think, we all have mental health. We know this. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. But when it comes to young people, we tend to either go, oh, we've just seen this awful story that's happened in the news, or we shy away from it. And I think we have to, now is the time, as you say, we need to lean into it. We need to work together. We need to be honest about it, and then really look at realistically, and again, by listening to young people, what are the best ways we can support you? What do you need from us? We can all be the professionals and say, well, we diagnose that you need this, this, and this, but actually, everyone's different. Samir, over to you for the last thoughts on that one.
Sure. So without a doubt, there are amazing people out there doing incredible work. And unfortunately, some of it never gets surfaced, doesn't receive the spotlighting or the visibility that it needs to receive. And so I just encourage those who are creating amazing curricula that we need to recommend, or who are doing awesome work with youth in this area, to try to let us know. And I always find social media to be a great spot for me to learn what's being done out there. And this might sound old school, but there are Facebook groups devoted to digital citizenship or bullying prevention. There are Twitter spaces where they talk about issues related to media literacy. And so I just want more and more people to join those, and for us to have a conversation that could also include, Discord channels, which are becoming more and more popular because you can easily upload files and share links. And it could be asynchronous, where you stop by every couple of days to get caught up on what the resources people are sharing. But you can also have synchronous conversations with those who are in the channel at the same time. I feel like we need to use these specific platforms in order to connect, because we're spread all across the world. And I would want you to feature my work that I really believe in, that is actually awesome and meaningful and intent and like fantastic. And I would also want to support your work that you strongly believe in the quality of.
That's amazing. Thank you, Samir. And I think that's a really positive place to leave this for now. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle in just a moment. Do either of you have any last things that we've missed, points you really want to get across in relation to, again, back to how digital literacy skills can help improve or support mental health?
For me, I just want to give a shout out to the audience members. Clearly, you're here because you care about this topic, and you have a platform, whether it's sons and daughters, whether it's grandchildren, whether it's the students that you serve, whether you coach or you're a leader in the community. And so I would just encourage you to bring up technology, bring up media literacy, bring up some of these subjects with those youth under your care. And I know that you might be nervous to do so. You're afraid to use the wrong technological jargon, but I think if you just broach the conversation, your youth will run with it because it is their lives, and that will give you the entree to sort of inform and help them to do better in certain areas, providing certain wisdom that you have to share. And secondly, it'll identify yourself as that point person that they can reach out to if they ever struggle down the road.
And I
That's
would,
exactly it, David.
yeah, I mean, I would reach out to teachers and say, I think if we are not arming youth with these skills, then we're not giving them 21st century education, and that this does need to be embedded in what they're teaching. It also gets the kids really excited, and so you don't have to worry about classroom management because they like it. And so there's such an opportunity there to align what they like and what they need to know, that we need to tap into that.
Thank you so much. Well, both of you, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the panel. I'm going to hand over to Michelle now to close us out, but thank you everyone for joining us. I hope it's been helpful, and ping us if you need anything.
Thank you, Laura and Samir and David. It's always amazing to hear from you. And I just really, really appreciate your perspective, your the way you come at these issues. My neck was hurting because I just kept nodding. I agreed with everything you were saying. But what I wanted to share right now as a wrap up is Laura and her colleagues at Roblox, and me and my colleagues here at Namely have been working really, really hard to kind of take some of this stuff that we know about what parents need to help them navigate the digital age. And we created resources that we are about to launch. I'm super, super excited about them. I'm going to share them now. And what you will see is there are 3 resources. They're called the 6 E's of parenting in the digital age. And we have a version for young children. We have a version for parents of tweens, and we have a version for parents of teens. And the 6 E's are exemplify, explain, engage, educate, empower, and empathize. And I've been doing work with parents for quite some time. And it seems that these are really, really the main points. How do we have a healthy relationship with technology in the home? How do we develop those skills? And so each resource explains the word and what we're talking about and the concept, and then gives parents really real life examples that they can use. And like I said, there's one for tweens and there's one for teens. You can find all of this on the Media Literacy website right now under the resource page. You can see new in 2022, but really, really these resources are built for parents to have the tips and kind of the tools that they need, because we know they all really want to do the best for their children. And sometimes it can be difficult if they don't know how to, where to start. So hopefully these are great resources to start that process. So we're really excited about it. We'll be sharing it on social media and working to get these in the hands of parents. So thank you again, Roblox, for your partnership and for working with us on all this. We're really excited to be able to share this with parents. And thank you all again for being a part of the 8th Annual Media Literacy Week, which continues. We have tons of events today, and we actually have an event tonight that I think would be very, very like a good follow-up to this event. It's with the Children's Media Association, where we're looking at digital well-being and making content and creating technology with digital well-being of children in mind. So please join us later. Follow along at #MediaLitWK. We are excited for what's to come next, and thank you for contributing, everyone. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here.